When I was younger and stupider and going to college in the North Georgia mountains, my friends and I would go night hiking a lot on the trails near campus. I got pretty familiar with the area and being out in the wilderness at night in general, which probably made me too confident. One night the full moon was out and the weather was perfect, so visibility was crazy good. Everything was basically washed in dim blue light. I was slightly stoned and feeling adventurous, and I love doing fun stuff alone, so I decided to go enjoy a night hike by myself. I took a flashlight, but this was around 2002, so no cell phone. I chose a super easy trail that was mostly flat / maybe a mile loop, in pretty secluded area, but not exactly a national park or anything, very rural area. I didn't even need my flashlight for most of it, and just hiked in the moonlight. It was actually a really cool / beautiful experience at first. At some point I started feeling uneasy, and maybe a millisecond later I heard a man's voice. It was coming from a good distance ahead of me, somewhere off in the woods, maybe from the right side of the trail. He was crying. I'm honestly an empathetic person, and 99.9% of the time I hear someone crying I want to comfort / help them in some way. But this time I felt sick in the stomach, like a dry panic attack, if that makes sense. I remember coming very close to calling out to him because my brain was trying to tell me he might be hurt, which was the only reason I hesitated. But it was like my body shut my voice down before I could say anything, and I knew I had to stay very quiet. He was sobbing like he'd just found out a loved one had died, but also gibbering and almost babbling, like he was less than a person. There was a shrillness to it under his crying, like he was holding back a scream, but perpetually, on and on, as if he'd been doing it all night. I remember it vividly, and my spine is tingling like crazy even as I write this. It's hard to explain, but I knew deep down he wasn't right in the head, and nothing good would happen if he realized I was listening. I went back the way I came. It was like I had tunnel hearing, and the only sound in the world was that crying. I was hyper-aware of everything else around me, and beyond paranoid that I would snap a branch or snag my boot on something. I worried the man's crying would get louder if I wasn't paying razor-sharp attention, getting closer, or turn into an outraged crazy person scream. Thankfully, it just faded the further I got from it, and I made it back to my car. Still, I was convinced some wild-eyed hermit was going to rush out of the forest and bite me to death, right up to the second I locked my doors and got the fuck out of there. I finally had the rest of my panic attack on the drive back. I managed to park back at campus, and I just sat in the car and collected myself. Adrenaline is fucking powerful. I have never felt a shred of guilt about leaving that guy crying out in the woods in the dark. I know I was slightly stoned, but slightly is the key word there. I'm convinced to this day I was in very real danger that night. Definitely not as insane as most of the stories and threads like this. But sometimes I get that same sick feeling deep down, whenever I wonder what might have happened if the moon been less bright, or if I'd been more responsible, and I'd decided to use my flashlight even once. He'd have seen me for sure. I used to often spend my summers bouldering with my friends by a relatively large forest that was about an hour and a half away from where I used to live. We used to spend some of the nights camping out there just to save some travel costs and time. Anyway, I think this was roughly like the third or fourth time we were out there camping. My friend had left all her climbing gear and her rucksack just outside her tent, or we definitely think she did anyway. The next morning we found her boots, a few clothes, and all her chalk powder had disappeared. We figured that it could have been completely feasible that she misplaced it. Although we were quite sure that they were next to her tent, we didn't really want to believe that they were stolen. Anyway, we didn't read too much into this and just stupidly said to ourselves that perhaps she had left it by the boulders and some animal took an interest to it. I know it sounds stupid, but it was very reasonable to us at the time. Anyway, fast forward a year, we're at the same spot as usual, sitting by the tents and chilling after having some food. Mind you, it's pitch black out and only the camp area is lit by the fire. I go somewhere a bit out of sight for a slash, and what do I see? A dude in a full-on ghillie suit laying on his stomach looking right towards our campsite. I kinda stood there frozen as this dude clocks that I've seen him, and he just bolts it out of there. I don't know whether the event of the year prior was related to the ghillie guy, but this definitely has stuck to all of us. We haven't been back there since, which is a damn shame. This happened to me a few years ago. I used to go to school at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm a runner, and the campus is in a beautiful redwood forest, so I would run on the trails. One day I left a little later than usual on a run through one of the more isolated trails. Here's where it gets weird. I was about 15 minutes running deep into the woods and still hadn't seen anyone else around. Suddenly up ahead, I saw what appeared to be a homeless man in ragged clothing walking on the trail. Now he was walking further into the woods, and this path went very, very far and the sun was setting. AKA this man was spending the night in the woods. I wanted to reach my usual running checkpoint before turning back, so I decided to keep my distance and run by. As soon as I passed the man, he called out to me, "What came first, light or sound?" In my head, I was like, WTF, this guy is nuts, but I decided to humor him and yelled out light without looking back. He said, "Well, I think it's sound, but who knows?" and started mumbling to himself. I continued on. I reached my goal and started to head back. It was really dark now, and I was feeling sketched out that I had to pass this guy again to get back. He seemed pretty crazy and potentially dangerous, but I didn't have a choice. I got past the point where I first passed him, but he was nowhere to be seen. There weren't any other branches of the trail, and if he had headed back, I would have seen him by then. He must have gone off the trail. Suddenly, a girl from up on a hill screamed for me to stop. I stopped and looked up on the hill, but it was too dark to see anything. I was freaked out. I called out to ask if she was all right and eventually saw her climbing down. The hill was really steep, so she put in a lot of effort to get up there and away from whatever was after her. She said that she was on a run when a scary homeless guy started harassing her and he chased her up the hill. But she didn't know where he went. She was going to spend the night there until I came along because she was too scared to go back down. At this point, we both wanted to get the hell out of there. Who knew if this creepy man was like lurking around watching us from the dark? So we ran back together and made it to the road. She thanked me and we parted ways. Never ran back on that trail again. Santa Cruz can be a pretty weird place. I've heard legends of students flunking out of school there and then just living in the forest. Maybe this guy was a student from years past. One night, my friend and I decided to hike to the top of this small mountain at night for a meteor shower. There were 4 of us, all around 16 at the time, and thought it would be cool. We drove over and started hiking. We took a break about halfway when we noticed there was a guy following us. In a business suit? We were weirded out, so we decided to start back up and walk a bit faster. But by the next time we stopped, he was like 10 feet away, so we bit the bullet to see if he'd just walk by. He didn't. He stopped and asked if we were there for the meteor shower and if he could walk with us. Weird, a 30-something-year-old man in a suit wanting to hike with 4 16-year-olds, but whatever. As we were walking, my friend and I noticed he was walking really close to our friend, the only girl in the group, like he could smell her shampoo close. We got to the top, sat down, and he sat down almost right up on our friend. With her reasonably freaked out, I made an excuse on why we have to leave early, and we promptly booked it the fuck out of there, nearly running the entire way down. When we got back to the car, we thought, cool, we ditched the weirdo. But no. When we were all in the car, my friend pointed out that this guy is full-on sprinting down the trail and towards our car with a large stick. Being in a car, we just drove out of there very shook up. We chalked it up to some dude on some hell of a drug, but 2 days later, we all got a text linking us to a news report about a guy that had strangled his wife and then proceeded to kill another girl later that night on a hiking trail. It was the guy, the same dude at the same hiking trail. We never told our parents about the incident and never went back there, ever. A few friends and I went on an overnight hike in the Rockies behind our little town a few years back when I was in HS. Our camping site was pretty far up there and it was getting dark. The spot we were at was nestled in a grove of trees, secluded from the wind and elements, so we decided to stop there for the night. The 4 of us built a little fire and ate dinner, then just talked for a few hours. Then all of a sudden, my friend leaps forward and douses the fire with our emergency water, plunging us into complete darkness. Needless to say, the rest of us were pretty pissed, as there was no reason for him to do this. He quickly shushes us, and we realize he is absolutely terrified, like so scared he couldn't even speak or move. The rest of us managed to get a few words out of him, and he tells us to look up on the ridge where we should have been camping at. It was pretty far up, so it was kind of hard to see at first, but that sight will haunt me for the rest of my life. There was a fire, a big one, like a bonfire sort of thing. Around the fire were several figures moving in a slow circle. They were humanoid, but not quite, and in they had arms and legs like people, but something just seemed different about them that I can't really explain. Almost like the limbs were too long and skinny or something, but maybe not. Anyway, these figures just moved around the fire in a really slow circle over and over again. My one friend claims he could hear them singing something, but I don't remember anything. Importantly, there was one standing off to the side a little ways, leaning with his arm on a tree branch above his head. It really creeped us out, but we were able to sleep it off. We figured it was a scout troop having a camp or something. Morning came and we finished off our hike to the peak, and on our way down we passed the place we saw the figures and decided to check out the camp. It was completely deserted. It was obvious that there had been a fire and there were footprints everywhere. Inside the fire pit was a small mound of charred animal bones, probably chipmunk, and a pile of 4 or 5 rodent skulls that had been burned. Creepy, right? Then we look over at where the one figure was standing. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to be of concern or anything but enough to be creepy. Then we see the tree branch he was casually leaning against. It was well over any of our heads, and I'm over 6 foot. That would mean that in order for the figure to lean against it like he would need to be at least 7 feet tall. Needless to say, we got off that mountain very fast, and I have never been up there again. We called the fish and wildlife rangers and told them what we saw. They said it was probably just a bunch of kids messing around and not to worry about it. It might have been just that, and we let our imaginations run wild. But all 4 of us swear to this day we all saw the same thing, and it didn't look like a bunch of kids in the dark. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but those mountains still scare the shit out of me, and I will never go back there again. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but there is something out there, ghost or dumb kids. I'm not going near it.